Right. Good morning, Heather. Welcome to Tea Time Talks with MDRP. We're so happy to have you here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're doing amazing work in the field of medical devices, so let's hear it.
So, I'm a scientist by trade. So I have a bachelor's in microbiology, a master's in biomedical science, and I got my PhD in molecular microbiology in 2009 from the University of London. Um, I did a couple of postdocs and then realized that life in the lab wasn't for me. So I decided to move into quality assurance and regulatory affairs, and I've been doing that for about 14 years now.
Wow.
And I've worked in all sorts of type of sectors, traditional medical devices, IVDs, software, all those sorts of things. And then a year ago, I launched my own consulting company, Fieldfare Consulting, and that's what I've been doing.
Wow, that's amazing. And once again, congratulations. Just for our viewers,
Thank you.
Heather's company completed a year since its incorporation. So congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And 14 years is a really long time to be in this field. So I'm very excited because today we're going to be hearing some amazing things from you. And without further ado, I think we can get started.
Yeah, sounds good.
So today we are taking a little bit of a detour from the regular medical devices discussion because we're going to be talking about the sex tech industry or the sex technology industry. And I remember a few months ago, Heather, when you had shared a post on LinkedIn about whether sex toys are going to be regulated like devices. And that's how we started talking. And I think it's been a bit of a mission of yours to unravel more about this and other such industries and how they may align with MedTech, right? So, for starters, just to understand your perspective, do you envision a scenario where sex toys, which, to be honest, even LinkedIn considers it taboo to talk about them, they will moderate and block your post. But do you feel that there is going to be a time very soon where sex toys are going to be regulated just like medical devices? What are your thoughts on it?
So it's a very good question. And I think in the short answer is no. I don't think sex toys will become regulated as a medical device, basically because it's all to do with intended use. So that's saying there there was a product from Mystery Vibe at the end of last year that is a vibrator, but it has a clinical case to it to that it can sort of protect against or sort of alleviate vaginal dryness, incontinence, those sorts of things. So although it is a sex toy, it has that clinical case, which is why it is classed as a medical device, and it's a class 2 510K cleared device from the FDA.
Yeah.
So so it's actually really quite interesting in that although sex toys can be a medical device, it is just down to the intended use of it, which is why I don't think medical sex toys will become medical devices as a whole. I think as the sex tech industry, sexual wellness industry increases and gains traction, and becomes less taboo, I think there will be greater sort of user knowledge, and actually almost demanding that there is some sort of aura of sex toys. Um, so currently in the EU, sex toys are under the General Product Safety Directive. So this only sort of encompasses sort of sex toys that have sort of electrical components to it, batteries, those sorts of things. um sex toys is such a wide range of products, and that's something that, as I've come to learn in the sort of the few sort of months that I've been sort of researching and learning about this field. So it sort of it encompasses toys which are connected, mains operated, uses a battery, all the way down to dildos, butt plugs, which is just a solid lump of material essentially. So I think whatever regulation comes in place, it has to have a sort of a graduated scale of it, because if something is just a lump of silicon, it's too much of a burden compared to something that's connected, Wi-Fi and battery operated, for example. So yeah, so to sort of answer your question, in the short time, no, but in the long term, I think there will be a better framework put around it.
That's very interesting. And of course, like we're talking about regulations, I know that currently there's no regulation per se as far as the requirements for these kind of products are in place. So, but at the same time, I feel that there may not be laws, there may not be regulations, but you did talk about a standard once in one of your LinkedIn
Yes.
conversations. And I think that's ISO 3533, the 2021 chapter. And could you tell us a little bit about that and how that impacts the sex tech industry?
Yeah. So standards, as you say, came out at the end of 2021, and it came about via some clinicians in Sweden who basically noticed the rise in incidents of people going to hospitals with essentially something stuck in their bum. The incidence is generally underrepresented, partly because it's embarrassing and people don't necessarily want to go to hospital and say, this is what's happened. So that's why the standard came about. And what it does is looks at risk of the toy. So this is its design, so the shape of it, whether it's sort of sharp edges, materials, whether it has vibration or heat, if it's sort of an enclosure device like a chastity belt. It looks at all the risks associated with the product, and it gets the manufacturer to assess those and put controls in place. And it also has requirements surrounding sort of post-market surveillance, user information that should be provided with the product. So from a medical device perspective, it is basically a watered down mixture of ISO 13485 and 14971, which is the risk management of medical devices. So I mean, that's why I read it and I was like, this is really, really interesting, because they almost are sort of positioning it as a medical device, although it's not. I should also sort of say that one of the big important points about ISO 3533 is that it's a voluntary standard. It's non-mandatory. So this is where it gets quite interesting, because as I've been talking to manufacturers and distributors of sex toys, you get quite an interesting perspective of the market, because obviously you've got some very well-known sex toys, but then it also encompasses like the small artisan companies. It could just be one person working in their spare time as a hobby because they like to produce these. Some of them are works of art, to be quite frank. And yeah, so having this standard, it's great, but it's voluntary. So I'm trying to open dialogue, conversation with manufacturers, with distributors, to see, firstly, are they aware of it? And, Secondly, is this something that's going to gain traction as time goes on? Because as I've had these conversations, you come to realize that there are a lot of toy manufacturers that are doing the best they can. You know, they want to do the right thing. They want to make sure their product is safe, using the right materials, and all those sorts of things. But then you also talk to some distributors, and they said, you know, they just get a load of crap basically that turns up, and it's, you know, there's nothing to say what the material is. You know, if it's like, you know, some sort of lubricant that comes with it, there's nothing to say what that is, what the constituents are. So it's sort of the will, you know, the sort of the willing is there, the framework is there. It's just how do you, you know, how do you bring about enforcement of it?
Oh,
And that's sort of the point that I've got to, with the sort of piece that I'm working on.
okay, that's very interesting. And I noticed that you said that the standard is voluntary, not mandatory, which I'm quite surprised to hear about that because, I mean, when you think about it, these are devices that are going to be inserted into the body cavity. And so when we have medical devices which make even contact with the skin, we do so many biocompatibility tests and we are doing their efficacy and safety analysis. And here, when you're actually inserting a device and you don't know what is the safety profile of it. And finally, because like
Absolutely.
we said, it's a taboo topic, so we don't really know if the consumer is aware of the kind of issues and risks that they are putting themselves through. So I'm quite surprised
Absolutely.
that this is still a voluntary standard. I mean, it should definitely be mandatory. And what could be the reason for that? Do you feel that it's because this industry is not really talked about, or what could that be?
I think it is. I think it is still just a taboo subject, bizarrely. Um, but you know, if you think about it, certainly in my sort of 14 years in this industry, we've sort of had the um, sort of mental health, um, you know, becoming less taboo. I mean, it's just the norm now to talk about your mental health and having, you know, things in place to deal with that, you know, whether it's in the workplace or apps or whatever. I mean, that's it. It's a normalized conversation to have. And I think now we're sort of moving into a another avenue of mental health, which is the sort of the sexual well-being, sexual wellness, um, sort of industry movement. But again, it's still kind of in its infancy, and you have a lot of barriers. Um, Certainly, you know, as you alluded to earlier, you know, LinkedIn, it will just pull down a post if you mention sex. And you have certain banks that actually won't open a bank account if you've got anything to do with like the sex industry or the sex tech. Investors as well are obviously, you know, can be coy about investing in a sex tech business or sexual wellness business. So it will become more normalized. It's just that we're just sort of at that junction of it becoming. So I think that's why it's almost good that it became voluntary first, because if it's simply like, right, guys, you all have to come and like work to this standard now, everyone's like, what? I don't even know what that is. So I think it would just have been too much too soon. um but you're right, it is kind of alarming that, you know, there isn't that mandatory framework. I mean, as I've said, you know, they are under the sort of the general product safety directive, so there has to be certain, you know, there's regulations around what materials can be used, battery safety, electrical safety, you know, those sorts of things. But I think what the standard is more to do is with the design. of the toy. And I think this is where ISO 3533 falls short, because yes, it's great that it talks about how to design a dildo, a butt plug, for example. But it doesn't talk about data security, for example, with connected sex toys. So, because as I mentioned earlier, sex toys encompass a really wide range of products, from connected electricals down to just a lump of silicon. So I think, yeah, 3533 is great, but it needs improvement. And over time, I think with better interaction with sex toy manufacturers, distributors, etc., it will become something that really works for the industry.
Well, that's the hope, and I think we are manifesting it now. So let's move on from whether it's needed or not. If we think about a time when these sex toys are, in fact, going to be treated like medical devices, what do you reckon are some of the biggest challenges for manufacturers of such products if it's brought under the medical device regulatory blanket?
I think it's cost implications. Um, it can be tens of thousands to get a product to market, with a quality management system and, hiring regulatory people and all that sort of stuff. Certainly, manufacturers I've spoken to have said, okay, this is all well and good having a quality framework, a regulatory framework, but how much is it going to cost me? These aren't huge companies, it could just be a one person making them in their spare time. So that is definitely a barrier, and it's something that will need to be addressed. Also, because a lot of these people, they're not from a medical device background. So understanding what to do and when, they could have the best will in the world and say, yeah, we actually really want to do, play by the rule book, make a great product, but how do I go about that? What do I need to do? When do I need to do it? Also, from 3533, there's a statement in it along the lines of manufacturers need to ensure that people are competent to do their job. So how do you assess that? And also, as the standard is looking at risks associated with the product, are there people within that company, even if it's a sole manufacturer, are they competent enough to carry out a risk assessment? If it's just a one person, that's not great. From a medical device background, you always have to have a risk management team, because you have different risk appetites. You think about things differently. And if it's just one person, that can be a danger, because they may not have appreciated all the inherent risks, or their risk appetite may be very different to another manufacturer's, and so therefore controls in place may be different. I think also there will be a knock-on for the supply chain as well. So if we think about the new IVDR, the MDR, the sort of the economic operators that need to be in place. So an importer and a distributor would need to check paperwork. So, and this would be under the same, anything really coming into a different market is the paperwork in order? Is there a material data safety sheet attached with it? Is there the user guide that that is present, that needs to be there? Is it a paper copy? Is it digital? All those sorts of things. So there's that extra burden on importers and distributors as well. So I think that's sort of the hurdle, and it's going to be that balance of what a user demands because having these conversations, normalizing these conversations can actually lead to, well, okay, I've got a sex toy in my drawer. I actually have no idea what material it's made from. And it questions the user. And so there's on one hand, there's going to be increased user demand for greater regulation, but then there's also coupled with what can the manufacturer do in terms of budgets, really. I think that's sort of going to be the big sticking point, I think, is how much is this going to cost me? Because it may just be like, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore, which is a shame.
Yes, absolutely. And also, do you think it is reasonable to assume that there is going to be resistance from the manufacturer side as well, because they are going to be required to have their processes according to definitive QMS that as we have for medical devices. So, for a lot of them, it may actually mean overhauling all their processes and doing everything anew. And we can say that some manufacturers, or rather most of them, may not be happy with that. So whenever the talks of this start to go around that they are trying to bring sex tech into medtech, I think we are also going to see a lot of friction between different camps, because some of them may not want that kind of regulation as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It will mean change. It will mean extra costs. And if anything, once the manufacturer's got their sort of pipeline in place, it's a hassle to change it. But as all the quality regulatory people will say, quality isn't a burden. You should be doing it anyway. It's a good working practice. It's just a formalized working practice. So I think the dialogue needs to be, let's help you do this. Let's assist where we can, rather than, right, manufacturers, here's a standard, go and do it. There needs to be that pathway and dialogue together, as manufacturers and regulators work together. So I think that's going to be, yes, as you say, it is going to be a challenge, and there will be friction. But I think the people I've spoken to already have willing, they are following, they are doing the best that they can, following best practice, and obviously, of course, any regulation that is there, they are following it. So I think I think it's a long road, but it could be a happy road.
Yes, yes, I really hope that we are able to see this time when these products are going to be regulated, and rightly so.
Mm.
So now, at the risk of digressing a little bit, I've seen on LinkedIn that you've talked about data privacy in femtech. So before we talk about that, firstly, for a lot of our listeners, I don't think there is a clear demarcation between sex tech and femtech. So if you could explain a little bit about that, and then talk about some of the concerning practices that are either being followed or something important that's not being followed in that field.
Yeah, sure. So the term sort of femtech was coined in 2016 by an entrepreneur called Ida Tin. And she actually went on to found Clue, which is a period tracking app. But it's basically, femtech talks about health and biological needs of a woman. And I think in this day and age, it's a vagina owner or a uterus owner, in terms of sort of trans, to make it more inclusive. But effectively, it's to do with that. So sex tech is related to it, but it more concerns with sexual wellness as well as sexual health. So wellness and health are obviously two very different things. But sort of femtech is is sort of part of that. There's sort of two Venn diagrams, but there is a bit of a merge in between. So that's the difference between the two. And femtech is probably less taboo now than it was, a few years ago. So it's ahead of sex tech in that sort of line of acceptance, if you will. So femtech's becoming a lot more involved, a lot more investment in it. There's a lot more companies. It's a big industry now. So in terms of data security and privacy, it's an interesting topic, especially if you look at EU and US data security principles. So within the EU, we have the General Data Protection Regulation. And that's not just for femtech, it's for everything, really. So that has the sort of the pillars of data security and protection, as well as the rights that a data owner has. So this is, if you're allowed to know what data a company holds about you, you have the right for it to be withdrawn, amended, corrected, all those sorts of things. But then if you move over to the US, so femtech data is covered by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. It's not under HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And that's where the issues lie, because HIPAA has the same levels of data protection that GDPR has. So you go to your doctor in the US, hospital, whatever data is there is going to be kept safe. So femtech data, so this is things like period tracking apps or menstrual symptoms apps, menopause apps, sexual sexual wellness, all of those sorts of things that you could be tracking on an app, for example. This is the sort of the data that isn't under HIPAA. So it doesn't have that sort of level of protection. So there is little or no restrictive measures that the data is collected, stored, and what can be done with it. So you have these sort of third-party data brokers that will collect this data and sell it to the third party. So this is sort of common, both within Europe and the US. Generally speaking, in the EU, actually, and a lot of good, reputable businesses in the US as well, they will say, this is the data we're going to hold, and it may be sold for, to third parties for marketing, for example. And some people are fine with that. And generally speaking, if you're not paying for an app or a service, generally speaking, your data is the product. So femtech companies can claw back some, expenses, or their revenue is actually the selling of data.
Yeah.
And as long as that's transparent, that's okay. Certainly in the EU, there is that framework under GDPR. But in the US, there isn't that. So, and this is where the whole Roe versus Wade issue came in with, sort of the fact that abortion in some states is now illegal, is that there is that visibility of data. So, for example, location tracking, that data can be sold. And there's been instances of third parties selling data of women and location in proximity to an abortion clinic, for example. So that's the worry. And there are a lot of protective measures within the US. It's not like some sort of cowboy thing going on. And a lot of manufacturers are protecting their customers, are protecting women by by putting measures in, so data is not going to fall into, you know, the wrong hands, for example. So that's great. And then if we sort of think about data security in sex tech, that is an avenue that's even less managed and less sort of secure. So you have connected devices such as the company Loveness, for example, whereby a toy is can be sort of accessed by an app. So it can be used with, you know, yourself or your partner, where you can control the app from your phone. And this is a lovely, so connected sex toys. It comes under this fantastic term of teledildonics, which I love. And so an incident of sort of hacking, for example, it was in 2018. So there's a sex toy called Panty Buster, and 50,000 users' data was exposed online. So this was clear text, images, conversation exchange. So very embarrassing, potentially for the manufacturer as well as the users. And also there have been instances whereby the sex toys can be hacked via the app and actually used without consent, which is serious and terrible and should never happen. So there again, you know, there is that sort of awareness that manufacturers need to take responsibility for these sorts of things. So you know, weaknesses in sort of computer code. You know, some manufacturers could just, you know, buy some code and it's not being sort of properly checked. So it can have those inherent weaknesses already in it. So yeah, those sorts of things. And that will, you know, manufacturer responsibilities can be passed on to the user to a certain extent, whereby they can say, you know, this is things that we recommend you do, actions you take to make your device more secure, to use your toy safely. Yeah, sorry, I feel as though I've been ranting on that for a while.
No, this has been great because there's so much new that I'm getting to hear from you, and I think it's very informative. I see we have a couple of minutes left. So, like we said, that this has been a bit of a personal mission for you to talk about sex tech and fem tech and bring them into the spotlight. So, just to wind up the discussion, could you tell us a little bit about some of the objectives that you have in your mind as you go on this quest?
Firstly, I want to have more conversations with people, key stakeholders, be that manufacturers, distributors, artisans, all those people. I think it's good to start having dialogue, start talking about sex toy safety, greater stringency, regulations, frameworks. From those conversations, we'll be able to ascertain what current practices are. Yeah. At the moment, I don't work in the sex toy industry, so I don't know. So that's why these conversations are just so important to have. And from those conversations, we can understand what people are doing, what the difficulties are, what the barriers are, and hopefully revising ISO 3533 to encompass more things like data security, for example, and then working with manufacturers to determine how this can be made mandatory, including, you know, timelines, costs, issues that people may have. So that's sort of my objective, and I would the overall is to make sex toys safe for everyone. Everyone deserves to have sexual wellness, sexual pleasure in their life, should they want to have it. And ensuring that it's all safe for use is just, yeah, that's the main thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather. I think this was extremely informative, like I said. And once again, thank you so much for taking our time to be a part of Tea Time Talks with MDRP. This is the first time we've tackled a topic which is not really a regular medical devices topic. So this has been very interesting and informative for me. And I thank you once again for being a part of Tea Time Talks with MDRP.
My pleasure. It was a delight.